Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are. I'm here again with Rasmus Sonderriis, who is a political commentator, a journalist, and just published the book on getting Ethiopia dead wrong. I think now it is out, and we discussed on the previous version. I think a couple of months ago, right? So now today
Right,
you'll
yeah.
also update us about the book and the main message or arguments of the book. Of course, we discussed about it some times ago,
Right.
but it would be great if we just give some what your take is about the particularly the Ethiopian politics as it has been portrayed and narrated by the international media, as well as what is really going on. Because the Ethiopian politics, in a very surprising manner, is much of a continuity than change, I would say. So since there is a lot of link between what happened a couple of years ago and still going on to a large extent, we will
Right.
reflect upon the major players or actors, particularly both the domestic actors, why we are still mired in the cycle of violence. And you have been I would say, a vocal critic of Fano and Ola over the last few months,
And
and we'll also talk
TPLF.
about and TPLF, of course. I mean, the book is mainly about the civil war with the TPLF.
That's right, yeah.
I would say the war is technically over. I mean, the violence is over, but the war continued in a different way. Now the TPLF itself is in a deep crisis. We may touch
Right.
upon that as well. That being said, let me start with your book actually, because you have it. Yeah. So tell us why are you concerned about the Ethiopian affairs, and particularly you decided to give a title which is "Getting Ethiopia Dead Wrong." So it's not only getting Ethiopia wrong, but it's getting Ethiopia really, really wrong. When did the idea come to your mind?
Well, I was here in 2021, and I was reading, for example, in the Telegraph that every Tigrayan, just for being Tigrayan, was being rounded up into concentration camps and murdered. And meanwhile, I was meeting Tigrayans everywhere. I was listening to Tigrayan folk music, and this image of Ethiopians as frothing Tigrayan haters, it just didn't fit what I knew from having lived for many years in Ethiopia. Nearly everybody has a Tigrayan friend or even family member, colleague, business partner. So that began to frustrate me. And for a long time, I was furious. And that it's not a very good state of mind to write when you're angry, right? So it took me a long time to dig into a lot of the coverage that I'd missed at the time, look into all the investigations, read the footnotes, the methodological appendixes, and come up with that book. And yeah, I think it's still frustrating me how much the international media romanticize these ethnic militias. I mean, there's a lot about it. The image of Africa, also the image of a multi-ethnic society as somehow incompatible with democracy. There's some truth to that. You need an authoritarian government to hold together a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. Is kind of the prevailing view. But at the same time, I see Ethiopians getting on perfectly well, right, across ethnicities and religions. So yeah, a lot of thoughts on that came into the book.
Yeah, so we will also get into some of the issues you just pointed out later on. But speaking of getting Ethiopia dead wrong, now in retrospect, as you said, you have at least more than a year or so to reflect on much of what have been happening while you were drafting or writing the first draft of the book, so to speak. So in retrospect, are there things that you yourself got dead wrong or got right?
Yeah,
So we
I
are
think first
speaking
of
in
all,
a
what I
retrospect.
got dead wrong what I got dead wrong was the international community's response, right? I expected them to support the Nobel Peace Prize winner against a movement with a very authoritarian record, right? So I got that wrong. That kind of ideological contest was lost in all the sensationalism about African savagery and cruelty, which sells much better, right? Especially in the media. So I definitely got that wrong. And then just before the war ended, when we had predicted that Ethiopia prevailing militarity would lead to peace, and everybody in the media, a lot of, let's say, the mainstream media was saying, look, if Ethiopia prevails in the war, there will be no more Tigray. They will kill every Tigrayan. That was the narrative, right? So I expected the outcome of the war to change the media's minds, or at least I was expecting some soul searching, but there was none of that. They still interview Alex de Waal, the same voices that got everything wrong. They're still counting as experts in the media. So I did get that wrong, but I do think there was some soul searching in the diplomatic circles, because you see today they want to have good relations with Ethiopia. I just saw, for example, in the New Humanitarian, there was a long article recently that basically romanticized Fano. But also there was a quote from Joe Siegler from some think tank in the US, who said these ethnic militias or these ethnic parties tend to use allegations of discrimination as a way to ethnicize politics. That's an understatement. They use it as a way to justify violence, actually, and the violent pursuit of power. But I thought that was very illuminating and very encouraging. It shows that I think at least the diplomacy, they are seeing through this narrative of ethnic discrimination that's completely overblown very often.
All right. Yeah. So you alluded to the fact that Ethiopia militarily prevailing would lead to peace. Right. And of course, you also suggested that you were expecting some sort of soul searching and coming to terms with the reality. And I would like to just focus on the first one for now, which is whether Ethiopia militarily prevailing has actually led to peace. Do we have peace since the signing?
Well, at least there's no fighting against the TPLF right now, right? And I think if they prevail against Fano and OLA, that's also the only way to stop the fighting. I mean, you had Tom Gardner on your show, and he wrote in his book basically that it was up to Abiy to make peace, but the concessions demanded are too high. They're very political, unelected power. As long as these militias have, success on the battlefield, the demands will just be too high. And the only thing you can give them is impunity. That's the main concession, impunity, and they can integrate it into some kind of fledgling democratic framework. That's the only concession you can make to them. And they will only accept that when they have lost on the battlefield. So I think that's going to be the same playbook with the OLA and Fano. It's going to be, they're going to have to be defeated on the battlefield to some extent. That's also why you have to put up with Ethiopia spending money on its military and security. And you have to accept that, it's very hard to build democracy, independent institutions in a country that has no such tradition, when at the same time government officials are being killed, right? You have a guerrilla lurking on the outskirts of towns all across Amhara region, sometimes making these raids into the towns and killing people. That hardens minds, and it is not very conducive to democracy. So,
but are they killing for the sake of killing? Are they enjoying the killing spree?
To instill fear and to create a sense of chaos. They don't want parents to send their children to school. They don't want the economy to work. They want to create a sense of chaos and failure, right? You can see how they gloat when things are not working. They impose transport bans. The latest thing, Fano even imposed a wedding ban in Wollo, because they want all the resources to go to the war. They want all the young men to join the war. And
Alright.
yeah, so it's very difficult.
And yeah, because these are very important, and it strikes to the core of what our discussion will be. So let's get back to it. And before that, I would like to clarify one thing which you have already touched upon, which is your conception of peace. So what is your definition of peace? Is it just an absence of fighting or violence, or peace is something that where you, and when I say you, where Ethiopia or any political entity addresses the underlying structural causes that led to the violence to begin with?
Sure. I mean, you've got to have state monopoly on violence, and you also have to have peaceful avenues for dissent. That's the only way. I am a strong believer in democracy, but I also have to admit it's not so easy to build a democracy, right? It took ages in the West, and Ethiopia cannot be expected to be very fast at building a democracy when there are so many security challenges. But of course,
But we are regressing, right? But even taking the Ethiopia as a starting point, that comparing Ethiopia with Ethiopia itself, and I believe that we had a better peace than the one we have now, 10
Right.
years, 20 years ago. So isn't that we are going in a wrong or in an opposite direction?
Yeah, you could say that. There are some people who are nostalgic for Meles I meet occasionally. Not many, but there are some. Yeah, of course, if you have an authoritarian government, you're more likely to have peace. But that's the price you pay. But then you still have these underlying simmering tensions that can break out into violence. So the best way is, you have to let the lid off and allow more freedom. But at the same time, that freedom can be abused for ethnic politics and extremism. And so, yeah, it's a difficult, delicate balance. I believe people have much freer now than they were 10 years ago, right? At least when you talk to people about politics, there's much less fear today than 10 years ago. Not that it's perfect, but people are pretty open about their political views now compared to 10 years ago.
So in your view, if you just take that to its logical conclusion, are you saying that the current crisis, this multiple crises we have been facing, are the result of liberalization, the people feeling the political space being widening? Is that what you are saying?
Yeah, also the old tensions, of course, with the TPLF, but yeah, when you lift the lid on society, if it's boiling underneath, you're gonna get some of that will spill over into violence.
What are some of the lids which have been lifted, if any? Because I couldn't see any political space. Okay, around the beginning, around 2018, 19, where in all the international media you were talking about are considering Abiy as a messiah, and then Ethiopia being a new liberal state in the making in the Horn of Africa. That was 5 years ago. But over the last 3-4 years, all the political landscape or political space has been shrinking, and everything is seen in terms of securitization and violent confrontation and settlement of political difference. So what are the spaces? Are there any spaces which are remaining now? And what are those leads you are talking about?
Yeah, I believe there's space. You can have constructive criticism. You don't have to say the prime minister is evil. He's killing all of us. We need to fight. Otherwise, we're all going to die. If you have a different discourse, you talk about the lack of public transport. You can complain about economics. Of course, there's space for peaceful dissent today. I mean, even under Meles, there was a very small space, right? I believe it's a bit bigger now. You're right. There's been a backsliding since all these wars began. But I think that's the only way forward, because armed rebellion is so costly for everybody. the results are very, very uncertain. Certainly, violence tends to empower extremists, and this is what we're seeing. So I don't think, even under Meles, I didn't think violence was wise. I thought it was legitimate, but not wise. And now it's both illegitimate and unwise. And the only way forward is to try to expand the democratic space gradually and peacefully. And, constructive opposition definitely is the way to go. But okay, that's not up to me. It's up to the Ethiopians. It's not.
I mean,
my expertise is more like
your observation,
how the world portrays Ethiopia, right?
Yeah.
So, but these are my core beliefs.
We'll be getting into that.
Yeah, these are my core beliefs. No, it's fine. My core belief is that violence must be a last resort because it always empowers extremists. You see that everywhere in the world.
But yeah, you also say that be it Fano or Ola or all other insurgent groups believe in violent pursuit of power. I'm just quoting you. So how could you make your demands and, of course, at times settle political differences within the current Ethiopian political system if the political space itself is very narrow or almost non-existent? Because violent pursuit of power is usually a last resort, right? It's supposed to be a last resort, and that is what everybody is saying. And Fano is, for example, to take Fano, they are saying they are forced to raise arms, and particularly they faced an existential threat, to use their terminology. So how could you blame anyone or any political actor as a neutral observer, as you are, that the violent pursuit of power is a choice within the current Ethiopian political machinations?
Well, there are several opposition parties. I don't know what you mean. I mean, of course, the space is not as great as you would like, but it's there. As soon as violence begins, it's bound to narrow. The security state will take over. People don't like getting killed, It hardens minds, and there will be a response. It can be too harsh. Ethiopia doesn't have much tradition of human rights and independent institutions. So, and of course, the response will be harsh, sometimes excessively so. Counterinsurgency should be within the law. Everybody would probably agree on that, but it's not always how it works out in practice. And yeah, you have to untie the knot and use whatever space there is and try to expand it in the process. I don't believe that we're anywhere near a situation where violence is justified. Also, you have the same forces like Fano, for example, who are saying, oh, now Abiy has gone beyond legitimacy because he's so oppressive that now we can use violence. But the same forces actually endorsed his election in 2021. You can't endorse somebody's election and then turn against them. You've got to, that's not how it works. It was very different. 2005, for example, the Ginbot Sabat election, 15th of May. There was an election. Clearly, the government lost it. It cracked down. Then you have legitimacy to start a violent response, I think. Not that it was wise, because you still have to have a realistic prospect of winning and creating something better, but at least you have the legitimacy. But there's none of that here. At least, prepare for the next election. If that next election is completely unfair, well, then maybe you can step up and, I wouldn't say resort to violence immediately, but you would have more legitimacy to push harder. Maybe you can use civil disobedience, whatever. I just don't think violence is going to help very much in Ethiopia because it always empowers these ethnic extremists. In Ethiopia, bread and butter issues like the price of bread and public transport, it doesn't really mobilize people for war, right? But ethnic politics does. That's the unfortunate fact in Ethiopia. And it's why, I would never vote for an ethnic party if I were Ethiopian.
Me neither. So as things stand today, can we talk about the election at all? Even can we use the vocabulary of election? Because now we know for sure that there is only almost less than 18 months until the next election, provided that there will be election. But now we have all militant nationalists everywhere, as you said, and then the government is also fighting in whatever form and shape. So how can we even talk about election, that Ethiopia is going to have an election, even if that symbolic election? And are you optimistic that we are going to have an election in the coming years?
I don't know if I'm optimistic, but certainly it would help if Fano would say, okay, we will lay down our arms, but just let us take part in the election. I mean, and the same deal would apply to the OLA. You know, you can lay down your arms and you can take part in electoral politics. It's the only way forward. But if they don't, yeah, you're right. If they don't, the security state probably will not enable a very fair election.
I'm not even referring to a fair election, even whether we are going to have an election at all, just to conduct an election.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there will be an election, sure.
But what incentives do OLA or Fano or any other insurgent groups have to lay down their arms?
No, they have none, unfortunately. Only if they lose on the battlefield. That's
even without losing, as you said, just to participate in a peaceful politics or a normal politics. What are the conditions or incentives apart from losing? Because you said that they have to lay down their arms and then participate in elections. That's why I'm asking you this follow-up question.
Yeah, you're right. They don't have much incentive because they have been saying, or they've been believing they could be an Arad killer within a few months and take power and change the constitution and do whatever they wanted. And they won't be able to do that through electoral politics. They probably don't have the votes. You know, I think the silent majority even in Amhara are completely against them more and more. But, you know, I don't deny that they have popular support to an extent. But I don't think they will have the vote because people like stability.
But
so they don't have much incentive other than surviving. If the alternative is to go to prison or be killed in a war, yeah, then maybe they will prefer to try to be patient and persuade people to vote for them. Maybe.
Or even, of course, they need time and the de-radicalization process itself and transformation into peaceful struggle and formation of party or reorganization of some sort will take years, if not decades from now. That is one of my concerns, even though, even if we agree that, okay, let's stop all the wars and have some national dialogue or elite negotiation and chart a new and different path forward. Even if we assume all this, and if all positive things conspires in favor of us or Ethiopia, I am not quite sure that we are going to have these ethnic militias, as well as even the government, to have a normal sense of doing politics or electoral politics, as you suggested, in the coming years. But that's my assessment.
Yeah, you're right. It's going to take decades, of course, to build a democratic political culture. I would say it took centuries in other countries. So if you can do it in decades, that wouldn't be too bad.
All right. Thank you. So last point on legitimacy, because you raised a very important issue, particularly by drawing analogy between that unfortunate but rather fateful 2005 election in the modern Ethiopian political history. Perhaps that was a critical juncture. I believe, as a young man who was only 14, 15 back then, that was probably the only time in the modern Ethiopian history that we had a free and a fair election, even though the result, the transition was aborted. That's it.
It was such a missed opportunity, wasn't it? I mean, imagine if Meles had said, okay, I lost, now it's your turn. Maybe I'll come back in 5 more years. He would have been a hero. But no.
Or if the opposition took what they got in terms of being not wise or unwise.
Also a very important point, yeah? I think they were too uncompromising. If they had just said, okay, we need to be more patient, okay, we will accept what we got, what was recognized, even if we think we were robbed, we will just take our seats, and definitely that would have been the better strategy. Berhane Nega, he went to Eritrea to fight from Eritrea. Doesn't really
just only to come back after 17
now
years
he's back in power.
and losing
Interesting.
his own
But
constituency.
Right, but it doesn't really say democracy when you're training in Eritrea, right? An army in Eritrea.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Ethiopian political culture, if the opposition, either ways, if Meles decided to hand over or at least create, let's say, the government of national unity, or the opposition took whatever they have because they were a significant, not even minority, they were a significant opposition caucus, I would say at least we would have one thing for sure. An improvement and a transformation in the Ethiopian political culture, because we will have an opposition and we will have a debate, and that is how democracy is to be built or had been built in other parts of the country. But in retrospect, everything is perfect and you are always right. So now let's come back about legitimacy. You said back then the opposition had a legitimacy or a justification to resort to violence somehow, but it was unwise, strategically speaking. But now both are absent. But don't you think that all the warring parties, particularly the insurgent groups, militant groups today, are questioning the very legitimacy of the current regime? Haven't you heard of that?
Sure, they question the legitimacy. You mean that they don't believe the government is legitimate? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I
almost
just disagree with them.
Invariably, yeah. Invariably, they
but
say
what is their legitimacy based on? The OLA doesn't even have the support of the Roma people. That's quite obvious. And they descend into banditry. They begin to kidnap people. They kill government officials. They extort people. There's nothing that indicates that they could create a better society or bring peace or anything. The only thing that can bring peace is an alliance between different ethnicities, right? You have to have the pro-Ethiopian majority, mainstream majority of the Oromos and of the Amharas, the two big ones. They have to come together. There's no alternative.
All right. And let's talk about Fano, since you have already mentioned more than once. And if they have a support, a popular support, irrespective of the number, because we don't have the number, we haven't conducted any survey, but based on many sources and observations that we know, Fano has gotten more support from the grassroots.
Right.
Given that fact, and they were also a partner or an ally with the federal government in fighting against the TPLF just a couple of years ago. Don't you think that, and also you said they endorsed it. I'm not quite sure if the same people or group who are fighting now endorsed the Prosperity Party back then. I think they were the NAMA, national...
maybe they didn't endorse the party, but they endorsed the fairness of the election, the legitimacy of the election.
Is they?
All of them. Yeah.
Those people who are fighting in the name of Fano now, today? I don't think so. But the NAMA, yes, the NAMA people.
Right. Sure. The NAMA people, people like Mesfin Tigenu from America, the diaspora people who support Fano now, they all endorsed the election.
So what has changed now?
That they decided to pursue power through violence.
But before deciding what has changed in between 2021 and 2023?
Well, of course, it began was it April 2023 when Fano was ordered to disarm. And you could argue that was hasty because Fano was hugely popular back then. They just defended Amhara territory against the invasions of the TPLF. And so they had a lot of legitimacy and popular support back then. Maybe it was bad timing. I don't know what happened behind the scenes. But it's also a fact that Amhara extremism did not begin in 2023, right? There was Asaminau Tsege, you remember, 2019, who killed what's his name, Ambateo Mekkonen, the leader of the regional government of Amhara back in 2019. So that there is an extremist undercurrent that actually I think I missed quite a lot, because I always thought Amhara nationalism was just Ethiopian nationalism. But no, that's not quite the case. So I'm not sure if the war could have been avoided, maybe. But now it's pretty obvious that Fano has no prospect of bringing neither peace nor harmony or anything. They can only bring death and misery and economic ruin, and especially strife among Amharas. I certainly noticed in Addis Ababa their support has gone down a lot.
But didn't they have a legitimate? Didn't they have legitimate concerns before resorting to violence?
Sure.
To be addressed.
Sure.
So when, for example, so to put things into context, when the negotiation between the TPLF and the federal government was ongoing, they asked for the Amhara concern or interests to be attended to, and then they were also raising all sorts of security concerns, and all of those were unheeded too. Now, if we say the Fano resorted to a violent pursuit of power, and they only believe in violence and banditry and all those things you have been using, including terrorism, what about all those concerns? And if somebody just asks you that they were basically forced to raise arms?
Sure. That would help a lot to assuage their fears and concerns. But right now, the TPLF is not in a condition to invade Amhara again. They got a little bit into Raya, but they certainly couldn't take Volcaid, or Western Tigray as they call it. But yeah, there are many issues that would help, right? If they could find us a good solution in Volcaid, if they can disarm TPLF, there has been a lot of progress on that, by the way, recently. I mean, now they're fighting among each other, and that should also take some of the pressure off Amhara. The Amhara regional government is now the enemy of Fano, but they also see themselves as championing the Amhara cause, right? Including Volcaid and defending Amhara against the TPLF.
Well, I was that's very important, but I was talking about whether it was the war with Fano was inevitable or not, because you said could they avoid going to war? I would say more likely if the federal government learned a thing, one or two, from the war with the TPLF. I would say that it was if we had a visionary leader, and with that hasty disarmament decision of the special forces and all other underlying factors, including that trigger, I would say it would have been avoided. But in any case, if the demand is incompatible, now when we talk about the structural issues, a broader issue, even though we have avoided that war and it's going to come back because you just suppress it and postpone the conflict for some time. But let me bring you to your recent remark about Fano. And you said that Fanos are no better than Ola and the TPLF, and they are using exactly the same playbook. Why are you so harsh against the Fano?
But it's the same type of propaganda. They play very much to Western sensitivities. They have a genocide hashtag. They're so full of it. We are being discriminated against. They're hunting us down. And meanwhile, Amharas are still doing quite well, especially in Addis. They're still, in the upper echelons of society. I'm saying that as a positive thing. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that at all. I admire success. But to say that Amharas are being hunted down, it's just not true. So, yeah. And it's the same as with the Tigrayans. They're also completely, I mean, there are some incidents, right? There are always some half-truth you can mobilize for your cause. But the bigger picture is that there's opportunity for everybody in Ethiopia today, and you have a multi-ethnic
Why are they
government.
fighting then?
Why are they fighting? I think there are some strong ideologies within Fano, sort of make Ethiopia great again.
Is it
there are many different.
Is it make Ethiopia great again or make Amara great again?
Yeah, exactly. Good question. Yeah, I mean, some of them want to reinstate the monarchy. No prizes for guessing what the religion would be of the royal family. Some of them say they want to abolish ethnic federalism, which may be an idea. I think even the prime minister wants at least to reform the constitution, but it cannot be done through violence. And you also have to accept that a lot of the non-Amhara ethnicities, they want to speak their own language. Amharic is so dominant in Ethiopia, right? They want to cultivate their identity and they want some role for their own language. So it's a difficult balance, right? You want to have a lingua franca. Amharic is great, but so yeah, it's easy it's many other ethnicities. They have this suspicion that when Amhara ethno-nationalists say, "Oh, we just want what's best for Ethiopia," what they mean is to turn Ethiopia into Amhara, and they want everybody to be Amhara. That's the suspicion. I'm not saying it's true, but you have to somehow take that into account, right? To make sure that it's a truly diverse country.
Yeah, perception. I would say it is a proper.
It's a perception, yeah. And also, as I write in the book, it's true that Amharas have been scapegoated in the past decades. That's definitely true. All these other ethno-nationalist extremists, they always scapegoat the Amharas, and that has been part of this counter-reaction, this extremist reaction, right?
But wouldn't that justify Amharas? But wouldn't
no, it doesn't justify it. It explains it somehow, yeah.
Movement?
No, exactly. You're right. No, it doesn't justify it, but it explains it. It goes some way towards explaining.
But I'm asking, I'm not making a statement. I'm asking you, doesn't that justify Fano's fighting for freedom and equality and justice?
Sure, if that's what they're fighting for. No, I don't think that's what they're fighting for. I think they have much more detailed agenda when they want to take power in Arad Kilo without any allies. I mean, it's quite telling they don't have any allies outside of Amhara. Same as the TPLF, they had, a few factions from the OLA, but they couldn't really mobilize any other support. You read in the New York Times that the TPLF insurgency was about gathering minorities from across the country to decentralize the country, but the TPLF never had support from anybody other than the OLA and one faction of the OLA, right? And it's the same with the Fano. They never managed to get support because there are ethno-nationalist extremists and people are suspicious of them.
So speaking of genocide, there's a genocide rhetoric. The Amaras would take you a long history of being scapegoated because you have already touched upon that. So thank you for that.
Right.
But since the establishment of the current political order, particularly the promulgation of the new Ethiopian constitution, which is based on a very shaky foundation, in a sense that it was a radical departure, and that radical departure was meant to remake Ethiopia in their image, the image of those liberation movement turned government, including the TPLF.
You're talking about the TPLF when they took power in 91?
Yeah, I'm talking about the new constitution, the constitution that we have, and much of the story we are talking about and the political practice we see, including the discourse, hate-driven discourse and ethnic cleansing against various parts of Ethiopia, including in Oromia and Benishangul and other parts of Ethiopia against Amhara people. So they are saying basically that the Amharas have been targeted, scapegoated for every ills that befell Ethiopia, and they say that the Amharas have been portrayed as exploiting and oppressing others, while they have been oppressed and sidelined and pushed from politics. And they are saying that before resorting to violence, they have asked, demanded through protests, through peaceful means, that the persecution of Amhara, a systemic persecution of Amhara, must end. And they say they have nobody to protect them, and the structure is flawed, and the federal government is not protecting the Amhara people. And then they have only one option, that is to defend themselves. So don't you see a merit in this argument?
I see some merit, but I don't see a justification of an extremist response, right? It's just like the extremes nourish one another, they fuel one another. That's what I see. And talking about ethnic cleansing, Fano also did some ethnic cleansing, right, in Volkite. All the IDPs now in Tigray who want to come back. It was kind of the side that I basically supported during that war, but that doesn't mean that I'm blind to Fano also committing some ethnic cleansing of its own, and also being quite chauvinistic in its approach to minorities in Amhara. So yeah, I just think, moderate from all sides need to come together and reject extremism. That's the response.
So where is it? So the rhetoric of genocide coming from? So let's finish this section on that, because everybody is talking. If the Amharas are using the political language of genocide, and the Tigrayans, as you know, that is a rallying ground, and even at times the Oromos are also saying that there is an Oromo genocide.
Oh yeah.
If the three major ethnic groups or dominant ethnic groups are talking about genocide being committed against them, that means somebody who is hell-bent on eliminating them, who is committing genocide against all the three ethnic groups, or who is morally justified to claim a genocide being committed against them.
Yeah, I think all three genocide hashtags are completely bollocks. I don't accept any of them. I know there are extremists who would like to commit genocide, I'm sure, but I don't, it's a way to justify your violent struggle. We fight or we all die. That's exactly what the TPLF said throughout that war, and that's what Fano is saying, that's what the OLA is saying, but fewer and fewer people are believing them, even in the international community. But there are many takers for that kind of narrative and that kind of discourse in the West. That's why they're using it. It's one way to lure in Westerners who have this idea about the African genocide. That's one function of the genocide accusation. And another is justification to your base, right? We have to fight or we all die. It's the perfect justification. It's the only justification, actually, that would work when you don't have any sort of other kind of legitimacy.
And speaking of the playbook that you just mentioned on your Twitter and a few minutes ago, is it perhaps because of the contagious nature of nationalism, which reinforces each other?
Could be, yeah. Yeah, as I said, the extremes tend to nourish one another. Absolutely.
Then how can we bridle this alt-right nationalism, militant ethno-nationalism, while we have different groups just watching their back, and they hate each other more than they hate the federal government? And now in this environment, how could we even manage to have any civil discourse?
Yeah, you're right. It's not easy. But I just think moderates from every ethnicity and religion need to come together and try to work together. That's the only solution I see. It would help to have some development.
So we tried that as well. I personally tried that to somehow talk the moderate or the so-called silent majority, but the silent majority has been absolutely silent.
Right. Yeah, that's one good point, actually, because I want to commend you for getting many kinds of views on your show, because that's quite unusual. Most of the shows are completely one-sided, but you actually listen to many kinds of people. You even managed to get enemies to talk together. That takes some special skill.
Yeah, it's a bit frustrating, the perspective of what we do or what we wish to have in Ethiopia. You do one, then it's one step forward, and then 3 steps backward, and it's a bit complicated and frustrating by the day. So that being said, now let's move on to the next discussion: getting Ethiopia dead wrong. I think before that, I need to hear from you, maybe just a couple of minutes. Were you expecting the TPLF fragmentation sometimes ago, or are you taken by surprise? What is really happening in TPLF over
I would
a
say
year?
I will be honest and say no, I didn't expect it. I'm a little surprised. I thought they would be more disciplined, but of course, it's not unheard of in a losing side to have internal fraction. I mean, I know that a lot of Tigrayans were very angry with the TPLF for starting a war that they would lose. So maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. But I mean, of course, I don't follow internal Tigrayan politics that closely. I don't speak Tigrayan, and so I wouldn't be an expert on that. But in a way, it's encouraging that people question the TPLF and want some change. I think the young people in Tigray, they really deserve better. So I hope there will be political change in Tigray, and it's good that the TPLF has been completely defanged. They're not going to attack in the current situation. They're not going to attack Walqaid or let alone Amhara region.
Whereas all those unity during the war has gone. Is it just dissipated, or is it
the
just
TPLF unity? You mean?
No, generally, even the Tigrayans unity during the war, and now you see different all kinds of factions, not only within the TPLF, but you can see the internal dynamics, which is festering and now even on the brink of actually precipitating probably another cycle of violence within Tigray.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't get that far, that they start killing one another in Tigray. That would be terrible. But yeah, some political change in Tigray would be very welcome.
And one more thing about the TPLF, and then I promise that is the final point. Can they blame the federal government, or particularly Abiy, for their own mess now?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Can they, the TPLF, still blame Abiy for their own internal crisis?
No, not really. Very difficult now. I mean, the border's open, right? You can fly in and out. They can pretty much run their own affairs. It is very sad, though, to have all this anti-Ethiopian attitude among many Tigrayans. Though here in Addis Ababa, you don't find that. Most of them are quite pro-Ethiopian.
You mean the Tigrayans or people of
Tigrayans living in Ethiopia? Yeah, they still get on with their neighbors and colleagues, and there are Tigrayan businesses here. They're still very popular. But in Tigray, I hear that they only display the colors yellow and red now, no more green. That's a little sad. I hope that will gradually change.
And now this is part of your book, and I'm getting into that. What was your observation living in Addis back 3 years ago that they were reporting almost everyone that the Ethiopians were turning, the neighbors were turning against Tigrayans? Did you notice that in Addis?
Turning on their neighbors? No, I did not. I mean, I know there are some extremists who would like to torch houses of Tigrayans and whatnot, but no, on the contrary, I would say a lot of people were they were upset about reports of civilians getting killed in Tigray. I remember there were even collections in support of civilian Tigrayans. And people are very keen to show their Tigrayan neighbors that no, we don't hate you. On the contrary, we consider you our compatriots, and we don't want any harm to come to you. It's just the TPLF that we don't want to come back and take power or to attack our army. That's what I found. But
very
I would say
interesting.
though that because the vast majority of Tigran, let's be honest, they did support the TPLF, that there was this, for many, many years in Addis Ababa, there was this idea that you can have Tigran friends, but try not to talk politics with them. Is that right? Did you feel that too?
Yeah, even though I still try to penetrate and talk to them, but that was prevailing, yeah.
Right, and that was a little bit sad. Maybe we should have talked politics with them a bit more, because it did create some kind of tension. I remember, for example, when they arrested Teddy Afro, that all the Tigrans, a lot of Tigrans were saying, "Oh, he committed a crime, now he must pay." And that was tough because many friendships on the line, right? Even marriages.
So perhaps is this one of the things that the Western media got dead wrong when they treat that as if Ethiopians, different independent ethnic groups, have been living in their own bubble, not talking to each other, not having a communal life?
Absolutely, yeah. It's funny. I just read this article in the New York Times, right, by somebody, Alexis Okeaobo. Sounds like an African, maybe a West African surname. And it says he spent 2 weeks in Ethiopia, right? But in 2 weeks, you don't get a sense of the inter-ethnic relations in 2 weeks. You just listen to a lot of propaganda from different sides, and you mix that up with your preconceptions about Africa and Ethiopia. But when you live here for a long time and you find out how, first of all, how to recognize who is what kind of ethnicity, how much ethnicity means or does not mean to people. I would say, especially the latter, right? How little it means to a lot of people, especially in Addis Ababa. Then you get a more nuanced idea. I mean, I admit though that I have a blind spot in that I've always lived in cities, right? I've traveled in countryside, but certainly in the cities, ethnicity is not so important to people as it's made out to be in the world press,
or at least in their daily life.
Right. When you choose a business partner, for example, very often ethnicity is not important, right? That's I can compare to other countries like India or something. It's pretty similar in many ways to India, I would imagine. Not that I know India very well.
Or maybe I could be wrong, and now I'm being part of the, let's say, the diaspora chain, and even though I'm not a diaspora, I'm just there for pursuing my study. But in any case, I've been away for the last 5 years, so I am not in a position other than having the privilege of monitoring media and talking to people and getting information on a daily basis, but I could still get it wrong. I feel that if we see Ethiopia on a continuum of, let's say, over the last 1 decade or 50 years, there is a fundamental transformation in terms of the discourse of nationalism or ethnicity. I mean, I call it ethio-nationalism versus ethno-nationalism because it's a very handy way of expressing it. So the tension between ethio-nationalism and ethno-nationalism, I am observing that a great chunk of people are migrating and disowning ethio-nationalism and then identifying themselves with ethno-nationalism. Take the case of Amara, as you said, or even the Tigrayans. Of course, war, a civil war, by its very nature, makes a nation and makes a state. I know that from a theoretical point of view. So don't you believe that all roads are leading to ethnicity? Are you suggesting quite the opposite? Because I believe that now in Ethiopia, almost all roads are leading to ethnicity.
Are you asking me if I think it's going to get worse or something?
No, I'm just saying that based on my own survey and observation and what I told you, the tension between the two identities and or nationalism, I am saying that the idea of ethio-nationalism is getting thinner each passing year with all the factors that we have mentioned. And also that people are using ethnicity for the how to call it for the everyday politics in a discourse. But you were telling me that it doesn't matter much for the daily life of people, at least those living in the city.
Yeah,
so my observation is to the contrary to what you are saying. That's basically what I'm trying to convey.
I think ethnicity is great mobilizer for war, right? If you can have an ethnic grievance, or this was done to us 100 years ago, or we are being discriminated against, or we are underrepresented, or whatever, it's a mobilizer for extremism. But I don't think it doesn't have to play such a big role in bread and butter politics about the economy or taxes or housing or these kinds of issues. So I just hope that more emphasis could be placed on those bread and butter issues.
But what roles? Okay, but then that's again very important to unpack. What role has the federal government played in terms of neutralizing this hyper ethnic nationalism? Because I am expecting, as a government, who would like, as you said, I believe, or I have a strong conviction that any government who is in power and who identifies, which as a political entity identifies itself as a moderate, or let's say a centrist-leaning government, have every incentives to neutralize ethno-nationalism. But I don't see the Prosperity Party trying to neutralize the force of nationalism. What measures are they taking? What have you seen in this regard?
Right, now you're getting really into the internal politics of Ethiopia, and I think it's a fair criticism, because ethno-nationalism in Ethiopia is on a spectrum, right? So you have the OLA and the extremists, but you also have other sort of soft Oromo ethno-nationalists who want to make Addis Ababa a little bit more Oromo, or maybe a lot more Oromo, and it's always on a spectrum, right? So it's difficult. You have a lot of interests that you need to combine or reconcile to make government work. But yeah, that's really a question you should ask the government.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I've tried to ask the government. I provided my own constructive criticisms. I also even sent a very brief policy document a couple of years ago as to what needs to be done. But it seems to me that the government is actually reinforcing the ethno-nationalism, the fire of ethno-nationalism, and which would consume not only the state, even the government. So I think there is no rational reason whatsoever for a sitting government or regime to play the ethnic card. And we saw that brought down the TPLF itself, right? That authoritarian regime, because people use the same card, like the same strategy against them, and are now trying to divide different ethnic groups just to stay in power for a time being is counterproductive. But that is my remark. So you are not expected to. Yeah.
No, I think it's great to have people like you who have criticism of the government and without necessarily supporting violence. And
yeah, I've never.
You're an Ethiopianist, right? You said you're an Ethiopianist.
I am ethno-nationalist, not ethno-nationalist. So
that's great. Yeah,
I have to make that very clear, and everybody knows. So let's get back to the book, because we have already addressed part of the book about the everyone turning against each one narrative. So one of the things that we have already addressed in the book. But the other thing is, what have you revealed in your book? So now we get into the what the Western media or political community got wrong about Ethiopia, and that which you find out in the course of writing this book. If you can share that with us.
Well, you can start by reading the back page, right? A lot of people who rank among the great and the good getting away with incredible lies and distortions. Quite shocking what you can get away with. I mean, it's like anything goes when it's about Ethiopia. You can get away with anything. You can say that 800 people were mowed down in the central square of Axum and eaten by hyena. And when it turns out to not be true, well, then you just come up with something else. There's no retraction. There's no regret. That's been so shocking to me, and it's completely changed my worldview in many ways. It took me a long time to process. Absolutely. I narrate my own. It's not a big topic in the book, but I do talk about how I had to revise my own assumptions about the world in so many ways.
let's talk about the narrative of savagery or African savagery, because that is because I read your book already, the soft copy. Of course, I'm yet to get the hard copy. So that notion of African savagery, so the savage and the savior narrative, which has underpinned all the foreign policy of the Western government to this day. You were singling out some individuals, of course, we discussed in our previous episode, but since we made that podcast, you wrote about Tom Gardner, who wrote a book about Abiy in Ethiopia. You made a very strong criticism that he's also one of, in the list of the people who got Ethiopia Dead Wrong, and why are you singling him out as such?
Well, he wrote a whole book with all these. I may encourage people to read it. Just Google another book about African savagery, self-projection. That's my very long review of his book. Yeah, I think he gets away with demonizing Ethiopian relentlessly. And there is this underlying assumption in his writing that Africans don't fight about, that's very nice, that Africans don't fight about important things. They don't have ideology. They just fight about silly things. So the solution is to wag your finger at them and tell them to be nice, tell them to be peaceful. And the solution, if there's a war, is to just disarm and not spend money on the military. It's very naive. It doesn't work like that in any part of the world. The way you put down an insurgency is to have a strong central state.
Good. So then, since the end of the war, because the international media somehow have had a different focus or orientation, because we have the Ukraine war and what is going on now in Syria, in Sudan, of course, a forgotten war, quite unfortunately. So, and the Israeli-Palestinian war. So over the last 1 or 2 years, they have been there. The focus of the international media is somewhere, at least after the signing of the Pretoria Agreement. What has changed since then? Have you noticed any correction of course when it comes to the international media? Have you seen any confession?
No, not so much the media, but in the diplomacy, not so much the media. They still romanticize these ethnic movements. They still treat African wars like about nothing, right? It's just about big men's egos and tribal madness, and they don't go into the ideology. So it's very easy to focus on the individual events, on the savagery, on the dead bodies and all that. And because it's very hard to understand. Ethiopian politics is hard to understand. It does take time. There's no sort of left to right spectrum. People always ask me, people who don't know Ethiopia, they always ask me, is the government left wing or right wing? You don't really use those terms in Ethiopia very much. You talk more about...
sorry to interrupt you. I used to say to people asking me same question here wherever I go, I just tell them one short answer, which is the Ethiopian politics has no wings.
Right. But you could say that there's another spectrum of ethno-nationalism to Ethiopianism, perhaps.
Perhaps as I was trying to conceptualize, but still there are a lot of layers you have to peel, and after peeling one layer, then you can still try to understand a tiny bit of the complex structure of the Ethiopian politics, as you say. So it's very complex.
Even for us, economic policy. In economic policy, you could say that there's a left to right axis, right, from economic nationalism to more free market economics. But that's not foremost on Ethiopians' minds, perhaps. But there is some of that. You don't have a cultural liberalism in Ethiopia.
We definitely don't have. Otherwise, we don't have this militant ethno-nationalism. Anyways, they are not
right.
Liberalism and ethno-nationalisms are not bedfellows, anyway. So
you're right. But economic liberalism,
kind of,
might
probably
fit in,
I would say. I agree with you, at least to in terms of the economic liberalization that the Abiy regime has been undertaking.
Right. So some would say that is right wing, right, or center right.
Yeah. But I have made one observation, speaking of the Western media getting things right or wrong, or the way they portray this one of ethnic madness, where people are hell-bent of killing each other. But if you compare what happened during the war with the TPLF, or the Tigray War, or the Northern War, whatever the name we give it, that there is a lot of support for the TPLF or Tigrayan war as compared to the Fano. The Fano, it took some long time even to get noticed, and even so that you cannot even compare the level of solidarity, sympathy, or whatever you can say about making headlines when it comes to the international media reporting about what is happening in Ethiopia. So I see a huge disparity between these two conflicts. Didn't you notice?
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are two factors perhaps. One is that the TPLF was in power 27 years. So they had a lot of time and resources to put their people in powerful places like Brussels and the UN system and Washington, D.C. to get their people into important positions, Tedros being the most prominent one, and a lot of other people that I can't say their names because, I just know their names and ethnicities and positions, but that's not proof of anything, right? But you know pretty well that they had powerful people in important positions and in positions where they could persuade other people, as I write about in the book. And I'm sure they had lots of money as well, because the Meles regime had very good contacts in the West. So that's one thing. The other thing is that maybe the world has learned a little bit from the TPLF war, right? That how wrong they got it, how they expected a full-blooded genocide to take place after the Ethiopian army prevailed in Tigray, and instead they got peace. And we were kind of proved right. We were totally proved right. This is what we've been saying all along. And they don't want to admit it, but maybe it has penetrated at least into the diplomacy. I certainly find many diplomats who agree with me and even say, okay, we were wrong. We listened too much to the media and not enough to the African Union. And we underestimated how good the Ethiopians are at playing to Western sensitivities in their propaganda.
So it is the issue of resource, network, and access to power, or probably strategy as well, how they played the game well in advance, in the most coordinated way, right? As compared to the Fano. Now, Fano is very fragmented, which is obvious,
right?
Which is a fact. They couldn't even agree on any campaigns. They don't have a central command. They don't have a specific organization around which they can mobilize, or even they don't have a common diasporic representation, or let's say a spokesman or woman, right? So I mean, we can make a lot of comparisons, or even within Ethiopia, the TPLF used to totally withdraw or disentangle from Ethiopia, even from the Ethiopian parliament. So in a sense, then the TPLF was fighting at the TPLF plus, other people were fighting, while in the Amara case, as you said, that one of the tragedies that the Amara Prosperity Party, the Amara wing of Prosperity Party is fighting against the Fano, which was not the case with the TPLF, right? So there are a lot of differences, but now I'm just focusing on
the you're right. There's
on
an insurgency, but there's no insurgency regime in Amhara region, right?
Yeah,
they don't have power in Bahadad.
So what is the end game? So what is the end game for the insurgent groups? I'm just trying to put things together and
for the insurgency groups.
Yeah, what is the end game for the different ethnic? I mean, the insurgent groups. I mean, Ola and Fano and about the TPLF.
I hope they will go to the they will join the negotiating table, but that will only happen if they suffer some setbacks on the battlefield.
But do they need to suffer to accept the peace process?
Probably, unfortunately, yeah. I hope it would be better if they would just do it of their own accord, but they have to give up their dream of making a terror killer. And the only has to give up its dream of taking Addis Ababa and calling it Finfinne. That's obvious. They have to lose to accept reality.
So what do you make of the one splinter group or all a splinter group signing or whatever, making peace with the government a couple of weeks ago? How do you see that?
Right. Of course, it's encouraging to an extent, but they're still bandits, right? As we saw when they made it into Addis Ababa, some of them. It's a hard pill to swallow that you make peace and give them impunity, but it is the only way forward, probably, right? It's something that the military people of Ethiopia have to consider or weigh up. It's not so easy for me to see how much impunity it's worth granting them.
So we have 3 more minutes to close our discussion. So before calling the day, I would like you to give us a message about how not to get Ethiopia Dead Wrong anymore. So some of the points that you would like the international community or any concerned body or individual or entity as they try to understand Ethiopia, what do they need to do and how could they learn from their mistake of getting Ethiopia Dead Wrong?
Right. I wish I could just say listen to the Ethiopians, but that depends completely on which Ethiopians you're listening to, right? But there's no substitute for getting into the history and ideology and trying to understand what kind of Ethiopia each party wants and try to understand the context and the history. It just doesn't. I'm not very optimistic that's going to happen. You can see nobody cared about what had happened from Abiy was elected or took office in 2018 and until the war began in Tigray. Nobody cared about that period, which was one of constant escalation towards war. They all seemed to focus on the last few weeks, a month at most, before the war. So I don't think it's very hard to change the dynamics of the press, but sure, that's what you need to do. You need to study the history, the ideology, the movements, and don't think that Ethiopians are so different from the rest of the world. In a way, they're similar in that, they don't hate each other. There's not this madness or hate. No, there are extremists, of course. There are moderates. There's a spectrum. There's no substitute for studying Ethiopian politics, really.
So I wish we could go on the whole day discussing, arguing, debating about the Ethiopian politics, which is very complex, even getting more complex the next time we meet. I hope that our audience would get something from this conversation, or probably they can pick up on some of the points we were trying to make. And it is a buffet of ideas, and that's why I have people with various backgrounds to freely discuss. And when warranted, then of course I have to also confront them with some factual issues. And I hope I was fair to you. And
yes, very much.
And hope
and
to
once
see
again,
you.
I congratulate you for getting so many different people together. That's great. That's amazing. Quite unique.
Yeah, I'm also happy to have you. It is my pleasure, and I'm happy actually that the internet, which and the power outage, which we have been concerned about, luckily
I'm
has
sitting right in the
gone.
middle of a corridor development project. Everything is chaos around me, and still the internet is fine, actually, even if it's a little slower than usual.
No, it was great today. So I will see you soon, and that was from us for today. Thanks so much, and I will talk to you soon, Rasmus.
Always. Thank you very much, Mogus.
All right. See you soon.